I remember the exact shade of gray in my mother's eyes when she asked me the question I couldn't answer the way they wanted. We were standing in the living room of the house I'd lived in for 22 years. Afternoon light cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and everything looked perfectly normal. The cream furniture, the abstract art my mother had spent 3 months selecting, the career books arranged on the shelf like trophies. I was still wearing my graduation gown, the tassel hanging limp against my chest. "So you've decided to reject your father's offer," my mother said. "Not a question. An accusation. I'm going to take the marketing job with Chen and Associates," I said quietly. "I told you and Dad this 2 weeks ago." My father stood by the window, his back to me. I could see his shoulders tense. "You told us you were considering their offer," he said, still facing away. "You didn't tell us you'd made a final decision, without consulting us." There it was. The real issue. Not the job itself, but that I'd made a choice without their approval. "I'm 22, I said. "I'm allowed to choose my own career." My mother's laugh was sharp. "Oh, Victoria, do you really believe this is about career autonomy?" That's when my father turned around. I'd seen him angry before, at business dinners when a client disappointed him, at my brother Marcus when he dropped out of law school. But I'd never seen him angry at me. Not like this. "Your father has spent 20 years building his consulting firm," my mother continued, moving toward the wine table. Her hands shook slightly as she poured. "He has spent years planning a position for you. And you repay that investment by humiliating him in front of his colleagues." Humiliating him? I felt my voice rise. "I told him I wanted to work in marketing, not business consulting. That's not humiliation. That's honesty." "That's ingratitude," my father said, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. I should have stopped there. I should have kept my mouth shut, let them cool off, handled it the way I'd been trained my entire life to handle family conflict, by appeasing, by negotiating, by making myself smaller. But I didn't. "You want to know what's really humiliating?" The words came out before I could stop them. "It's knowing that Mom has known for 3 months that you've been with someone else. It's sitting at dinner while she pretends everything is fine. It's watching her pretend while you—" I stopped. The silence that followed was the worst silence I've ever experienced. My mother's hand froze halfway to her lips. The color drained from my father's face in a way that told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't realized she knew. He hadn't realized I knew. "How did you?" my mother started, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I saw him," I said, my anger suddenly replaced by something colder and clearer. "I saw Dad with that woman at the Grand Hotel. I followed him because I was supposed to meet him for lunch, and his assistant said he was in a meeting there. And instead of a meeting, I found—" I trailed off. The image was vivid and horrible. My father with his hand on another woman's face, kissing her in the elevator lobby. My father's expression shifted from shock to something I'd never seen on his face before. Shame. Just for a second. Then it hardened into something else. Something that looked a lot like rage. "You had no right," he said quietly. "No right to follow me. No right to spy on your father." "I wasn't spying. I was trying to meet you for lunch. And instead of being a good daughter, instead of handling this privately like an adult, you decided to weaponize it against your parents. Against your family. I didn't tell you to humiliate yourself," I said, and I could hear how young I sounded. How desperate. My mother set down her glass. "Victoria, sit down." I didn't sit. I stood there in my graduation gown, feeling very suddenly like I was standing on the edge of something enormous and dark. "We've been discussing something," my mother said, and her voice had taken on the careful tone she used when discussing difficult clients. "Your father and I. About your future. About what comes next." Something in her phrasing made me very still. You've always been difficult, she continued. Even as a child. You questioned authority. You resisted guidance. We've tried to redirect that energy toward constructive outlets. Your father's mentorship was meant to help you channel that into ambition. Instead, you've turned it into something destructive. I just want to work in marketing, I whispered. It's not about marketing, my father said. He was looking at me now, and his eyes were cold in a way I didn't know they could be. It's about loyalty. It's about family. It's about understanding that your parents have sacrificed everything for you, and the least you can do is repay that with respect. And discretion, my mother added. About family matters. The words hung there. What are you saying? I asked, though I already knew. Some part of me already knew. My parents exchanged a look. The kind of look that communicates an entire conversation without words. We've made a decision, my father said. Effective immediately, you are no longer a member of this family. You will not contact us. We will not contact you. Your trust fund will be closed. Your name will be removed from this house. As of today, you are our daughter no longer. I thought he was joking. I stood there in my graduation gown, waiting for him to laugh. Waiting for my mother to stop this. Waiting for this to resolve into some kind of normal family conflict that could be fixed with time and apologies. It didn't. Pack what you can carry, my mother said, turning away. You have 2 hours. And that was when I understood. My parents weren't angry because I'd pursued my own career. They were angry because I'd seen my father's betrayal, and instead of protecting their image, I'd held up a mirror. And they would punish me for it. That was the moment everything changed. I spent the first night in a Hilton garden inn off the highway, still wearing my graduation gown because I couldn't figure out how to undress and cry simultaneously. I'd packed a suitcase in 90 minutes. I'd grabbed my laptop, my birth certificate, a box of letters my grandmother had written me. I'd looked around the room I'd slept in since I was 12 and tried to commit it to memory, knowing somehow that I'd never see it again. My mother had watched me leave from the stairs. My father was in his study, the door closed. Neither of them said goodbye. I kept checking my phone, certain they would call. Even as I sat in that hotel room with my mascara running down my neck, I kept thinking, this will blow over. They're teaching me a lesson. They'll cool off, and we'll talk about this. By morning, I'd called both of them 17 times. By evening, my father had changed his number. By the end of day 2, I understood. This wasn't a punishment that would end. This was final. I had $8,000 in my checking account, money I'd saved from summer jobs. I had a job offer that started in 2 weeks at a marketing agency. I had a college degree and a skill set that was, objectively speaking, employable. I also had no family, no home, and a profound sense of having been erased. The weird part about being disowned is that everyone else moves on very quickly. My brother Marcus didn't call. My aunts unfollowed me on social media. My mother's book club friends stopped liking my Instagram posts. It was like I'd died, except I had to keep existing anyway. I spent those 2 weeks in an extended stay motel, eating cereal for dinner and reading job onboarding materials I couldn't quite focus on. I contacted a real estate agent and found a studio apartment I could barely afford. I bought the bare minimum, a mattress, a desk, a lamp. On my first day of work, I sat in the office bathroom and cried for 5 minutes, then got myself together and walked into the bullpen like nothing had happened. No one knew. No one could see that I'd been dismantled and reassembled into someone harder and colder than I'd been before. No one knew except me. And in that quiet knowledge, something shifted. I stopped waiting for my parents to call. I stopped checking social media to see if they'd posted anything. I stopped being the girl who was waiting to be taken back. Instead, I became someone new. The first month was survival. The second month was strategy. I worked 60-hour weeks at Chen and Associates, partly because the job was genuinely demanding, and partly because staying busy kept me from sitting in my studio apartment thinking about my family. My manager was a woman named Patricia Chen, who was approximately 1,000 times smarter than everyone else in the office combined. On my third week, she asked me to stay late to review a client campaign. "You see something in this strategy that no one else is catching," she said, pointing at my notes. "How did you notice that?" "My father was a consultant," I said automatically, then stopped. "I mean, he is. Was. I don't really know what he is to me anymore." Patricia set down her pen. "Do you want to talk about it?" I didn't. But I did. Sitting in that office at 9 o'clock at night, I told her the whole thing. Not the affair. I wasn't ready to say that out loud to a professional. But I told her about the disownment, about the ultimatum, about being erased. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My parents didn't speak to me for 5 years, she said finally. "I married someone they didn't approve of. I became a woman they couldn't recognize. And they decided I wasn't worth the effort of understanding." "How did you get past it?" I asked. "I didn't try to," she said. "I just became someone they were eventually proud of, whether they wanted to be or not. And then I realized I didn't need their pride anymore. It was just extra. I took that lesson into my work. I stopped trying to be good at my job for external validation. I started being excellent because excellence was the only thing I could control." By month 3, Patricia gave me a client account to manage solo. By month 5, I'd saved enough money to move into a better apartment. By month 8, I'd been promoted to senior coordinator. My parents didn't know any of this. As far as they were concerned, I was either failing spectacularly or didn't exist. The second option was easier to pretend. 9 months into my new life, I did something I'd been avoiding. I searched for my father online. His consulting firm had a website. My father's photo was at the top of the page, the same photo he'd used for his company newsletter for 3 years. He looked successful, confident, unbothered. I clicked deeper. His firm specialized in operational efficiency for mid-sized corporations. They'd recently taken on a new major client. There was a profile of my father in a local business magazine from 2 months ago, Richard Ashford, Building Excellence in the Modern Enterprise. The article talked about his philosophy of integrity and trust. It talked about how he'd built his firm on the foundation of family values. I read that line 4 times. Then I closed the browser. But the thing about the world is that it keeps spinning, and people keep making choices, and consequences have a way of catching up with you even when you think you're safe. 11 months after my graduation, my brother Marcus reached out to me on a private Instagram account I didn't know he had. "I'm sorry," the message said. "I didn't know what happened between you and Mom and Dad." "Not really. I just knew you weren't around anymore. But I'm finding out stuff now, and I wanted to reach out. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for 2 hours before responding. "I'd like that," I typed back. We met at a coffee shop in the Arts District, nowhere near anything my parents would frequent. Marcus looked like my father, with my mother's eyes, and seeing him felt like looking at the family I'd been expelled from. "I talked to Aunt Patricia," he said immediately, before we'd even ordered. "The one on Dad's side. She's apparently been concerned for a while about something with his business. And when I asked her what happened with you, she was shocked that I didn't know. She told me everything. About how you found out about his thing. About him cheating on Mom?" I said quietly. "It's okay to say it out loud." "Yeah," Marcus said. "About him cheating on Mom. And then apparently, instead of dealing with it, Mom and Dad decided you were the problem because you wouldn't pretend you didn't know." That's the short version, yes. Marcus looked genuinely miserable. "I should have called you." I should have done something, but I was scared. They made it seem like you'd done something wrong, and I was a coward, and I just went along with it. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're here now. That matters. It did. It mattered in a way I hadn't expected it to. Over coffee, Marcus told me what was happening at home. My mother was drinking more. My father was working constantly, coming home late, staying in his study until after everyone was asleep. The house that had always seemed perfect was developing cracks. Dad's business is struggling, Marcus said. I overheard him talking to Mom about a major client that pulled out. Something about inconsistencies in their consulting recommendations. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, at work, something was shifting. Patricia called me into her office on a Tuesday. I want to start a new division, she said without preamble. Focused on ethical marketing practices and brand transparency. I think you'd be perfect to lead it. I'd been at the company for 16 months. I was 23 years old. I don't have the experience, I said automatically. You have something better, Patricia replied. You have perspective. You understand what it means to have people in your life who lie. You understand betrayal. And I think that gives you an intuition for how to help companies navigate their reputations with integrity. I took the job. The new division was small at first, just me and one junior coordinator named David. But we built something interesting, a service that helped companies audit their marketing practices for transparency gaps. It was, I realized, the opposite of what my father did. My father helped companies optimize their messaging. I helped them make sure their messaging was true. 3 months into running this division, a company came to us for an audit. It was a mid-sized corporation in the financial services sector. They were concerned about their brand image and wanted to ensure they had solid ethical practices. I ran the audit myself. It was a good company, transparent, well-intentioned, the kind of company I didn't need to worry about. But in the process of researching how to build better auditing protocols, I started looking at how other consulting firms approach these problems, including my father's firm. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just curious about best practices and what the industry was doing. What I found was a case study of my father's company helping a pharmaceutical company rebrand after a product liability scandal. According to the case study on my father's website, his firm had enhanced the company's narrative around the scandal, positioning it as a case study in proactive liability management. I pulled the articles about the scandal. The product had harmed people. Real people. People who'd taken the medication expecting it to be safe. My father's firm had helped reframe that as a business problem instead of a human problem. I saved the files to a folder on my computer I called Research. My mother sent me an email. It was almost 2 years after graduation. I'd built a life that was small but genuinely mine. I had an apartment I'd decorated myself. I had friends from work. I had a job I believed in. I was making enough money to think about the future without panic. The email had the subject line, "We need to talk." My hands shook when I read it. Victoria, it began, using my full name, formal, distant. We've decided that we've allowed enough time to pass. We're prepared to reconcile with you, but there are conditions. You would need to accept a position in your father's firm. You would need to publicly apologize for your behavior and what you've put our family through. And you would need to agree that what happened remains private and is never spoken about again. It was a reconciliation offer with no actual reconciliation. It was, accept our terms or remain exiled. I closed the email without responding. But I kept it. Something shifted in me after reading that email. I stopped thinking of my situation as something that had happened to me. I started thinking of it as something that had happened because of deliberate choices my parents made. They'd chosen to disown me to protect my father's image. They'd chosen to maintain the lie rather than address the truth. And now they were trying to buy me back by asking me to become complicit in the lie. I started digging deeper into my father's business practices. Not out of revenge, out of curiosity at first. But curiosity became something else as I kept finding things. My father's firm specialized in something called narrative optimization. That sounds benign, corporate, but what it actually meant was helping companies tell stories that were technically true but emotionally misleading. A tobacco company wanted to rebrand as a lifestyle organization. My father helped them. A textile manufacturer with documented labor violations wanted to emphasize their commitment to workers. My father helped them. A financial institution that had overcharged customers wanted to position themselves as customer first. My father helped them. I built a spreadsheet. I documented every case I could find. I looked at before and after brand perception data. I saw how my father had made millions helping companies look good while doing harm. I showed it to Patricia. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "My father's business model," I said. "He's smart. He's good at what he does. And what he does is help bad people look like good people." Patricia set down the spreadsheet. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I don't know what to do with it," I admitted. "Because I'm angry. Because I can't stop looking at it. Because I want." I stopped. "You want revenge," Patricia said gently. "I want justice," I corrected. "But I don't know if they're the same thing." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "They're usually not. But sometimes, if you're very careful and very patient, you can make them overlap." I stopped searching for information about my father's clients. Instead, I pivoted. I started researching his firm's actual practices, their methodology, their internal protocols. This was harder, but I was patient. I did it through public records requests, annual business filings, SEC documents, public lawsuits, things that were available to anyone with the time and knowledge to look. What I discovered was that my father's firm didn't just help clients optimize narratives. They sometimes helped clients hide things. There was a settlement agreement with a former employee who discovered her supervisor inflating billable hours. The case had been quietly settled with an NDA. There was a complaint filed with the Better Business Bureau about misrepresented service results. The complaint was retracted shortly after, with no explanation. There was a client who'd been facing investigation by the FTC for deceptive marketing practices. My father's firm had been hired right before the investigation closed without charges. I couldn't prove anything. Not yet. But I was starting to see a pattern. The pattern was, my father helped people hide things. And if you help people hide things long enough, eventually you're complicit in those things. 2 years and 4 months after graduation, something broke. It was a Friday. I was at my desk, working on a campaign for a non-profit focused on environmental justice, when David came over with his laptop. "I found something weird," he said. "I was researching audit protocols, just general stuff, and I came across a consulting proposal from a firm called Ashford Consulting. They were hired by an environmental company to rebrand after environmental violations." My hands went very still. "Let me see," I said. The proposal was detailed. My father's firm had been hired by Westbrook Environmental Solutions, a company that had been fined $2.3 million for illegally dumping contaminants that had affected a groundwater supply for 17,000 people. The consulting proposal was outlined in 3 phases: narrative development, media strategy, stakeholder communication management. What that meant, translated, was figure out what story to tell the media that story, and manage anyone who objected to it. "That's horrible," David said, reading over my shoulder. "That's my father's company," I heard myself say. David turned to look at me. What? That's my father. Ashford Consulting is run by my father. I could see David processing this, trying to make me match up with someone whose father would do that work. I was disowned, I said quietly. 2 years ago. Because I refused to work for him. This is why. I didn't tell Patricia I was looking into my father's firm specifically. But I did suggest that Chen and Associates should start taking more clients who needed help navigating corporate responsibility and transparency issues. I suggested we create a specialization in helping companies that had harmed communities remediate those harms in genuine, not performative ways. Patricia agreed. She always agreed with good ideas, even if she suspected there might be personal motivation behind them. Victoria, she said to me after I'd pitched the third expansion of this new division, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Is this about revenge? No, I said, and meant it. It's about wanting to exist in a world where people don't get away with causing harm. It's about wanting my work to matter. And if my father ends up on the wrong side of that, then so be it. That's a good answer, Patricia said. But I want you to think very carefully about the difference between seeking justice and seeking punishment, because I can help you with one, but not with the other. I know the difference, I said. And I did. Justice would be if my father was held accountable for his actions. Punishment would be if I was the one holding him accountable. Justice doesn't require an audience. Punishment does. I was starting to understand that I didn't want an audience anymore. 3 months after David discovered the Westbrook proposal, something happened. One of Westbrook's executives was interviewed by a journalist working on a broader story about environmental consulting firms and their role in helping corporations minimize accountability. The interview went public in a major environmental publication. In the interview, the executive admitted that they'd hired Ashford Consulting specifically because the firm was known for managing difficult narratives. He meant this as a compliment. The journalist meant it as an indictment. The article titled, "When Consultants Help Companies Look Good While Doing Harm," went viral in certain circles. It specifically called out Ashford Consulting's work with Westbrook as a case study in corporate ethics failures. My father's face was in the article. His photograph next to quotes from environmental groups about how his firm's work had delayed accountability for real environmental harm. The article was fair. It didn't misrepresent anything. It just showed what was actually true. My father didn't call me. He didn't need to. I learned what happened next through Marcus. After the article published, my father's firm started losing clients. Not all of them, but enough. The major pharmaceutical client that had been with the firm for 8 years terminated their contract. A financial services firm pulled out. 3 mid-sized corporations decided to move their business elsewhere. In the corporate consulting world, that article became a calling card. If you hired Ashford Consulting, you were potentially hiring the firm that had helped hide environmental harm. My father responded by doing what my father always did. He denied and deflected. He issued a statement saying the article was a one-sided political attack and that his firm's work was grounded in ethical business practices. The problem was, the article had facts. Multiple facts. Verifiable facts. And no amount of denial could erase facts. Within 2 weeks, 2 more clients terminated their relationships with his firm. Dad's stress is at a level I've never seen before, Marcus told me over coffee. He's barely sleeping. He's snapping at everyone. Mom's scared. I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Sympathy. Not enough to reach out. Not enough to fix it. But enough to notice. Here's the thing about revenge, even the kind that isn't actually revenge, it doesn't feel the way you think it will. I'd imagined that watching my father's firm suffer would feel like victory. But what I felt was something more complicated. I felt sad. I felt angry. I felt vindicated and guilty simultaneously. I called Patricia into her office. I'm going to step back from leading the corporate responsibility division, I said.
Why?
She didn't sound surprised. Because I started it for the wrong reasons, and I'm starting to realize that's poisoning it. Tell me, Patricia said, and I did. I told her everything. About my father. About the spreadsheet. About feeling like I was building a case against him instead of building something real. Patricia listened. She always listened. There's a difference between choosing your work because you believe in it and choosing your work because you want someone to suffer, she said finally. You can have multiple motivations, but if the primary motivation is punishment, it corrupts everything else. So what do? I asked. You decide what you believe in, Patricia said, and then you do that work, whether it affects your father or not. I didn't step back from the corporate responsibility division. Instead, I reframed it. I stopped thinking about specific companies my father had worked with. I started thinking about the broader mission, helping companies understand that their long-term reputation is built on actual good practices, not just good marketing. It was a radical idea for the consulting world. Most firms, including my father's, operated on the assumption that perception was reality. If you could control the narrative was true. I was arguing the opposite, that reality eventually catches up with perception, and the only sustainable business model is one built on actual ethics. It was a harder sell. It was also more honest. We started taking clients who wanted to do the hard work of real change. Companies that had made mistakes and wanted to genuinely remediate them. Companies that wanted to build sustainable practices, not just good PR. Some of them were scared we'd turn them away. We had to build trust that we weren't there to punish them, but to help them. One of our first clients was a mid-sized technology company that had discovered their supply chain had labor violations. They could have hired my father's firm to obscure it. Instead, they came to us because they wanted to fix it. We helped them develop transparent remediation. We helped them communicate honestly about what they'd done wrong and what they were doing to fix it. We helped them understand that accountability could actually build customer loyalty instead of destroying it. The campaign worked. Customers respected the company's willingness to be honest. The company's stock price went up, not down. That was when I understood. My father had built an empire on a lie. The lie was that people wanted their companies to hide harm. In reality, people wanted companies that were honest about harm and were working to fix it. My work wasn't punishing my father. It was proving his entire business model obsolete. 18 months after the environmental article, my father's firm was in serious trouble. It wasn't just about the clients they'd lost. It was about the clients they couldn't get. Every time someone Googled Ashford Consulting, they found that article. Every time they called, they got a firm that was smaller, less confident, less relevant. My father tried to rebrand. He launched a new website with new language about ethical consulting and sustainable business practices. I recognized everything my firm stood for, but without any of the actual commitment to it. Marcus sent me a photo of my father taken at some charity event. He looked tired. Actually tired, not just visibly stressed. He looked like a man who was watching his legacy disintegrate and couldn't figure out how to stop it. That's when my mother called me.
Hello.
I answered, because I didn't recognize the number. It was my mother's. She'd changed it since the disownment.
Victoria.
My mother's voice was different. Older. Can we meet? I almost said no. Part of me wanted to say no, but something in her voice made me hesitate.
Why?
I asked. Because I've made a terrible mistake, she said quietly, and I want to talk to you about it. We met at a restaurant equidistant from both our lives, in the part of the city that belonged to neither of us. My mother looked like she'd been crying. Actually crying, Not the dramatic tears of someone facing social consequences, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who'd been sad for a very long time.
I should have believed you, she said immediately.
About your father. I should have believed you, and I didn't, and instead I punished you for telling the truth.
Yes, I said, because it was true.
I've known about his infidelity for longer than you think, she continued. Years. I found out 2 years before you did. I chose to ignore it because I didn't know what else to do. And when you called me on it, I was so angry at you for making it impossible to ignore anymore. I let her talk. I didn't offer comfort. Your father's business is falling apart, she said. And I'm watching it happen, and I realize that all of this, the reputation, the success, the house, the life we built, all of it was built on the same lie I was living. And we're all suffering for it now. That's not really my problem, I said quietly. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to come home. I'm asking you to know that I know what I did was wrong. And that you were right. You were right, and I punished you for it, and that was a terrible thing to do. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you want from me? I asked finally.
Nothing, she said. I just needed you to know.
After my mother left the restaurant, I sat alone with my coffee for an hour, trying to process. She'd given me an apology. It wasn't the apology I would have written for her. It wasn't specific enough. It didn't address the full harm. It didn't offer genuine repair. But it was an apology. I called Patricia. My mother just apologized for disowning me, I said. How do you feel? Patricia asked. I don't know, I said honestly. She's not asking for forgiveness. She's just saying she was wrong. That's sometimes more honest, Patricia said. Because forgiveness is something you give someone. But knowing you were wrong, that's something you have to live with. A week after meeting my mother, I got a call from a journalist. She was writing a story about consulting firms and corporate ethics. She'd found my name through Chen and Associates. She wanted to interview me about best practices for corporate responsibility. I agreed to the interview. I didn't tell her about my father. She didn't ask. But midway through our conversation, she said, I have to tell you, I'm fascinated by your firm's approach because it's the exact opposite of what I'm seeing at most consulting firms, including Ashford Consulting, which is one of the companies I'm investigating for this piece. My heart rate jumped. What do you mean investigating? I've found evidence that they've helped multiple clients obscure harmful practices, she said. I'm working to verify some details before I publish. Have you ever worked with Richard Ashford? I could have lied. I could have said I didn't know him. He's my father, I said quietly. The journalist went very still. And I have documentation, I continued, of at least a dozen clients his firm has worked with where they've helped obscure harmful practices. I can show you. The article came out 2 months later. It was massive. It was a comprehensive investigation into how mid-tier consulting firms help corporations hide harm. And at the center of it was my father. The journalist had been thorough. She had internal documents. She had client testimony. She had before and after narratives showing exactly how my father's firm had optimized the truth into irrelevance. There was the pharmaceutical company that had harmed patients. There was the environmental company that had dumped toxins. There was the financial firm that had defrauded customers. All of them had hired my father's firm to make their harm look like something else. And now it was all public. The article didn't name me until the very end. A brief quote from a source close to the firm, who provided documentation. But anyone who knew my father would understand. I watched it spread. I watched his firm's website become a liability. I watched his LinkedIn profile as connections started disappearing. I watched his phone ring, then stop ringing, because there was nothing left to talk about. I also watched the real consequences. The companies that had hired my father's firm to hide their harm were now facing actual investigation. The pharmaceutical company was looking at additional liability. The environmental company was facing fines. The financial firm was losing customers. Justice, it turned out, required exposure. And exposure required someone to be willing to tell the truth. That someone had been me. My father didn't call me. He didn't send an email. He didn't reach out through Marcus. He simply disappeared from any public record I could find. His firm laid off most of its staff. The office lease wasn't renewed. The website went offline. Richard Ashford, the man who had built his entire identity around being successful and impressive, became someone who simply wasn't anymore. Marcus told me that Dad had taken a consulting position at a much smaller firm. He was making a fraction of what he used to make. He'd had to sell the house I'd grown up in. He barely leaves, Marcus said. He just works and comes home and doesn't talk to anyone. I felt something for him in that moment. Not forgiveness, not even sympathy, exactly, but a kind of recognition. He had built his life on the assumption that image was everything, and when his image shattered, there was nothing left underneath. It was a loss I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it was also the natural consequence of his choices. 3 years after the article, I got a call from an estate attorney. My grandmother, my father's mother, who I hadn't seen since the disownment, had passed away. In her will, she had left me something. It was a letter and a small amount of money. Not a fortune, but meaningful. The letter was from my grandmother, written years before her death, before the article, before any of this happened. My dear Victoria, it began. If you're reading this, I've passed, and your father has likely done something spectacular and terrible. He was always going to. He has such a capacity for self-deception, and I've watched it destroy him from the inside out for his entire life. I want you to know, I always saw you. I always knew you were the one telling the truth, even when no one else believed you. And I wanted to make sure that you knew you were never actually disowned from the larger family. You were only disowned by people who were scared of what your honesty would reveal. Use this money to keep being honest. Keep building things that matter. And forgive your father eventually, not because he deserves it, but because holding on to anger is a kind of prison, and you're too smart and too good to waste your life in one. I read that letter 17 times. I cried every time. My grandmother had seen me. She had believed me. And she had done what my parents couldn't do. She had chosen truth over image. 4 years after my disownment, I was offered a partnership at Chen and Associates. I was 26 years old. I had built a division that was transforming how corporations thought about ethics and accountability. I had rebuilt my entire life from scratch, in a way that was not reactive to my parents' cruelty, but generative of something real. I accepted the partnership. I also made a decision. I would reach out to my father. Not for reconciliation. Not even for apology exchange. But because my grandmother's letter had made me understand something. Holding on to anger was a choice, and I was tired of making that choice. I sent him an email. Dad, it read, I'm not writing this expecting a response. I'm writing it so that I can stop carrying this. I'm angry at you for what you did to Mom, and for how you treated me when I told the truth about it. I'm angry that you chose your image over your integrity. And I'm angry that I spent years thinking that anger was justified in hurting you. But I understand now that I was never actually angry at you. I was angry at myself for thinking that your cruelty could define me. And I'm done with that. I hope someday you understand what you lost when you decided that image mattered more than your daughter. But whether you understand it or not, I've stopped needing you to understand it. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be better than okay. Not because of you, but in spite of you. And that's enough. I sent it on a Tuesday afternoon from my office. I didn't expect a response. 2 hours later, I got one.
Victoria, it said, I don't know what to say.
I've read your email 50 times, and I still don't know what to say. You're right about all of it. I chose image over integrity. I punished you for telling the truth, and I lost you because of it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything, but I want you to know that I know what I did was wrong. I'm sorry. That was all he said. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to explain himself. He just said he was sorry. I printed it out. I looked at it, and then I let it go. 5 years after graduation, I sat in my office at Chen and Associates, partner, corporate ethics and accountability, and thought about the girl I used to be. She was someone who defined herself by her family. She was someone who believed that her worth was determined by her parents' approval. She was someone who, when that approval was withdrawn, thought she had nothing left. She was wrong about that. What she discovered in the rubble of that disownment was that she could build a life that meant something. Not because she was proving anything to anyone, but because building meaningful things was, in itself, meaningful. The division I led had helped 43 companies transform their practices from performative ethics to actual ethics. We'd helped real communities remediate real harm. We'd built something that made the world slightly better. That wasn't a revenge story. That was a redemption story, except I hadn't needed redemption. I'd needed to understand that I wasn't broken, just temporarily lost. My father's firm was gone. His reputation was in ruins. But that wasn't what freed me. What freed me was the realization that his fall and my rise were two completely separate things that happened to occur in the same timeline. I had built my life not as a reaction to his destruction, but as a creation separate from him entirely. Marcus had married and moved to Portland. He and I had rebuilt our relationship into something real, something based on actual love instead of family obligation. My mother and I had slowly, tentatively rebuilt some kind of relationship. She'd gone to therapy. She'd done the work of understanding why she'd chosen image over honesty. We would never be close, but we were honest with each other, and that was enough. My father had never reached out again after that email. I had heard through Marcus that he'd left the city, moved somewhere smaller, where no one knew his name or his history. He'd become anonymous, which I think is what he needed. I didn't hate him anymore. Hating him would have meant I was still defined by him. Instead, I was defined by what I'd built. By the people I'd helped. By the work that mattered. On the day I made partner, I did something I'd been avoiding for 5 years. I visited my grandmother's grave. I brought flowers. I sat there for a long time in the quiet cemetery, and I thanked her for believing me. I thanked her for knowing, even before I knew, that honesty would be worth it in the end. And I promised her that I would keep building things that mattered. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because that's what people who value truth do. They build things that last. That's the real revenge story. It's not about destruction. It's about becoming so genuinely good at something that your existence is a living refutation of everything your attackers stood for. My father had built his life on the lie that perception is reality. I had built mine on the truth that reality eventually wins. And in the end, that's what sets you free. I'm 30 years old now. The division is thriving. Patricia retired last year and I took over as CEO of Chen and Associates. We've expanded to 3 offices. We've helped transform industries. I got married to someone kind and honest. We're thinking about kids, which is funny to think about because I spent so long not knowing what family meant anymore. But I know now. Family is what you build when you decide that truth matters more than image. It's people who show up because they actually want to, not because they're obligated. It's small, but it's real. Last year, I ran into my father at a coffee shop downtown. He didn't see me, but I saw him. He looked diminished, but not unhappy. He was reading a book about philosophy. He looked like he was doing the hard work of figuring out who he was underneath all the image building. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. Our story wasn't about reconciliation. It was about me learning that I could survive the loss of family and build something better. That's the ending. Not that everyone learns and grows and we all become better, but that one person can decide that honesty matters more than comfort, and that decision can change everything. That one person can become so committed to truth that it becomes her entire identity, and that identity can set her free. That's what happened to me. And that, in the end, is the only revenge that actually works. Living well, living honestly, and refusing to let anyone else's cruelty define what you're capable of becoming. I spent 5 years waiting for my family to recognize my worth. Then I realized my worth was never theirs to grant. Silence became my strategy. Patience became my power. I didn't need them to understand what I was building. I just needed to build it anyway. And in that quiet refusal to be diminished, I found something stronger than revenge. I found myself. If you've been gaslit into believing you're difficult for asking for honesty, you're not. If you've been punished for telling the truth, that punishment says everything about them and nothing about you. Your survival isn't a victory lap. It's the only proof you need that you were always enough. I'm sharing this because someone reading this has been disowned for seeing clearly, has been erased for refusing to pretend. If that's you, your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. Write your own ending. The revolution starts when you decide that honesty matters more than belonging. Have you ever had to prove your worth to a family that underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about reclaiming your power, building boundaries that hold, and discovering that the best revenge is simply refusing to let anyone else write your story.